want to be involved in the conversation. So we were kind of talking about, like, at the end of the meeting, I was kind of decided that I probably should go back to the drawing board and try to figure out, like, exactly what the narrative is, because the narrative is the most important part. I mean, on a more conservative and conservative in terms of how the IRS may look at these organizations. Worst case scenario, they may look at it as a place to just go trip, you know, go use psychedelic or psilocybin for recreational purposes, essentially. And I know a lot of places probably will open for that purpose, for places to go and have an enjoyable time, perhaps. I don't know. I find it much more than you know, taking mushrooms for recreational purposes. And so we have to, like, kind of develop the narrative.
Yeah.
And my knee-jerk response, and like my most conservative, or not conservative, but my most like, I guess, defensible position would be to come up with a narrative in which there's some sort of program that we're offering, or some sort of service we're offering that can be turned into an initiative by, say, a nonprofit organization. And then kind of look at it from more of a nonprofit perspective, because there's all sorts of services that a nonprofit could provide. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but then also kind of from, like, a perspective of, let's try to keep it simple, keep it a for-profit endeavor, and then how do we mitigate the tax implications of potentially just a regular corporation, for-profit corporation, or LLC. So do you guys want to introduce yourselves? I imagine we probably won't have too many more people. Seth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
To B and...
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Justin. So my name is Seth Mayer. I'm a physician in Portland. I currently own and operate Cascade Psychedelic Medicine, working exclusively at the moment with ketamine, and so have been facilitating psychedelic sessions for over a year. I've done about 800 sessions here. Have submitted a psilocybin service center application to the state, and plan to open a service center inside my clinic to start offering psilocybin services.
Right on. Thanks, Seth. And then CK.
Yeah, I'm a Midwesterner. I'm actually anchored in Ann Arbor, the safest place in the country for psilocybin. Literally, I cannot get arrested here. We've got the trifecta. I said that was you decriminalized it at a citywide level. You have a police force that literally couldn't care less, because they've been dealing with drugs here in Ann Arbor for decades, 50 years, and it just isn't an issue. And the third thing is, your county prosecutor has publicly said they will not prosecute plant work at all, at any level. And we've already proven it out several times. We've had cases already brought to the prosecutor by the police, and they won't prosecute. So it is the safest place, but it's a tiny little oasis. Anyway, I'm in the travel consulting business. So what I've done and doing is working to move people to Oregon for therapy. And I basically act as a consultant through transcendental trips. It's basically a consulting operation that acts as a travel concierge. Kind of direct people to facilities and places they may want to go. I'm the inside guy. I have all the groundwork. I know the right places you'll go to, the right facilitators. You want to go close, fast, far, so I'm that guy, and I'm positioning myself in the Oregon market. I don't live there. I won't have residency recommendations, but I'm very much concerned with a lot of things: production, testing, site building, facilitator
Yeah.
training. So thanks for letting me pop in.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining us. So what's your Discord? Are you because we
Professor
communicate
Mushroom.
Is that you? Okay.
I'm Professor Mushroom. So
Okay.
my alias is Professor Mushroom. Yeah.
Okay, great. Great. Now I'm recording this meeting. Is that okay with you that we're
Sure.
recording this meeting? Because
Sure.
I mean, yeah. Okay, great. I don't think that there's any.
Where are you going to post it?
Well, I do have my own website, YouTube channel that
Yeah.
I do post.
Post it away.
For
I'm doing a
information.
weekly grow shop for Portland Psychedelic Society starting tomorrow at 5 o'clock Pacific, your time. So
Oh,
every
okay.
week
Do you
I'm
want to
doing
post it on Discord and maybe we could, yeah.
So I'm already out there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then B, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi. Thanks for letting me call in again.
Yeah.
So I am an Oregon resident and I live in Portland, and I am studying to be a psilocybin facilitator. And I'm very excited to do that in the future. And I've also been one of the people working on the OPSCC, the Oregon Psilocybin Services Community Collaborative, which was a grassroots network advocacy group. And we did a lot of good work around the proposed rules, and we got quite a few of our recommendations taken seriously by the Oregon Health Authority. And that was really great to be a part of. And I'm really excited to just, learn all I can about this. I hope to be a part of a service center in the future that does a nonprofit or cooperative or steward kind of model to put this work out there. Not worried about profits as the first motive, but just making it accessible to people. And so I'm definitely interested in talking to people who are interested in that as well. Yeah, I think that's, and be a friend on Discord, and friend is actually my real name. A is my middle initial and B is just shortened for my legal first name. So
Nice. I do like the name B. It's great.
thanks. I do too. It's straightforward, short, to the point.
So last week we had a conversation, and I thought I was kind of presenting, Seth, the same kind of presentation I did for you in terms of like my thinking of how the entities can be structured and how we could mitigate like 280E issues. And that's kind of where I'm coming from. I mean, I feel like 280E is like, for me, like my priority, and then backing into the legal structure is like secondary, because 280E could be pretty devastating for businesses. I've worked in the cannabis industry for years, and it's taken years and years and years to develop like a good methodology, and it still is always very nebulous to try to take a more aggressive approach to mitigating 280E versus taking a conservative approach, which then will oftentimes put a business into financial hardship. So I'm trying to like jump on it so that when you guys first come out of the gate, there's some sort of methodology you could use so that you're not just then immediately hampered by taxes and tax debt, which so much of this is like so unknown right now in terms of how the various federal agencies are going to respond to psilocybin, and the one that I'm most preoccupied with is the IRS. So there's all sorts of things to be concerned about. And so B kind of informed me, like at first I had like a narrative already established, and then B kind of told me that reviewing the rules, and then I've seen it myself now, that the Oregon Health Authority doesn't want us to make any kind of medical claims or anything like that. It's interesting that it's governed by the Oregon Health Authority, right? And what is that? I mean, that by default, it's saying, well, this is a potentially a health services kind of related activity that we're doing. And
I don't know if
implicit
I'm
in the
just going to
business.
pop in and
Yeah,
say, I don't know
please,
if they're
please,
saying
Dee.
that it's a health thing. I think they're saying that it could be a health risk, and that's why they're, so it's like a
health
harm
risk.
reduction model.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so harm reduction, like, yeah, so that is it changes, it flips the narrative, right? Because at its just basic message is that this isn't like a medical it's a medical consideration in that it's harmful. It's not psychedelics are going to be able to treat PTSD and depression and OCD and all these various things. So there's no, like, from my perspective, no like state narrative saying that this is it's a medicinal program. And that would really help us if we could adopt that narrative. But the rules, like, they intentionally kept that all out of the original bill. I think to avoid federal actions by making claim to the medical benefits of psychedelics, which it's not, and it's intentionally saying you can't say those things. And so therefore it kind of made me go back to the drawing board, and I've had now a week to think about it a little bit more and do a little bit of research. And I think that there's a spectrum that we might be able to land on in terms of like legal structures and compliance requirements. And each one of those has its nuances. Some I'm an expert at, and some of them I only know about. But it definitely is, it's something to think about, and nothing is a sure thing at this point because it's so new.
And Justin, I just want to, just for clarity for all of us, your decision making right now is kind of hinging on this. Is it medical? Is it therapeutic, or not, as a binary thing? I just want to read the text from the measure that addresses this, because I do think it's a gray area. I think it's deliberately gray. And so as far as like where do we place ourselves in the narrative, I want to just read it so we're all on the same page. Okay, so this is under advertising restrictions in the measure, and it says advertising for psilocybin products and services may not make claims that psilocybin products and services have curative or therapeutic effects, or make other health claims that are not supported by the totality of publicly available scientific evidence. In parentheses, it says, including evidence from studies conducted in a manner that is consistent with generally recognized scientific procedures and principles, and for which there is significant scientific agreement among experts qualified by scientific training and experience to evaluate such claims. So I think that leaves room in there to advertise and make claims about its therapeutic value that are supported by the totality of scientific evidence out there. And so again, that's as much as the text offers us for guidance. But mind you, there's now decades of research in psilocybin in, internationally recognized academic settings, with clinical research published in mainstream accepted peer-reviewed journals that do address therapeutic claims. So I think people will interpret this differently. I do think that there are going to be centers that avoid this entirely and advertise this as an experience, and it would be, their business model be more akin to bungee jumping center than something in the medical field or therapeutic. I know for me in particular, I'm going to have a different take on this, and I am planning on quoting and at least referring to studies that show the beneficial effects of psilocybin with depression and end-of-life anxiety, and keep it narrow and supported by the literature. So yeah, I think there's going to be different ways of interpreting that language.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think some there are going to be narratives that can be adopted that does support therapeutic benefits, or is claiming therapeutic benefits, even though it may not be as supported by, say, other institutions, I guess you could say. But there definitely will be those people. And exactly like you're saying, it's going to be like, I was thinking a facility that provides sensory deprivation, sessions, things like that. But the opposite, of course. And so each one of those has there's a different opportunity and a different legal structure that can be adopted. And that's kind of where I'd like to go into. I don't need to go into it right now because I'm still trying to understand things.
I'm curious your thinking here, Justin. You're suggesting different business structure for two different approaches.
Yes. Yes.
And I want to unravel that in a little bit, but I'm going to ask another pointed question about not-for-profits. And let's just not use that phrase, because I think it's part of the problem. So 501s, why, other than the fact I work for a 501. We made millions. Our budget was huge. It was 100 million. We were in business with DirecTV and our cooperatives and our electric. So we were a cooperative. We were member owned, and we were a not-for-profit, but my job was to make money. I had to make millions of dollars in business transit, like I would do at Toshiba or any of the other companies I worked for. So I'm very anxious when people keep saying, I'm a 501, I'm a not-for-profit. The reality is you have to make profits. You have to earn money above what your expenses are to stay in business. Now, the amount of profit you make can be, and I always subscribe to this, but why would someone choose to be a not-for-profit in this arena as a business entity?
Well,
there's a few benefits. I'm just going to pop in here really quick and say there's actually a license fee benefit. So it's $10,000 for a for-profit company for a 1-year license for both manufacturing and also service centers, same amount. And for a nonprofit, it is $5,000.
Okay.
And so
it's not a big number.
The other issue is that
multi-million-dollar operation, but keep going.
We all understand that nonprofits need to make money to keep the lights on, to pay the workers, but a nonprofit is intentionally not going to do what major companies are doing these days, where they take money, from overcharging for stuff or whatever, and buy shares back and make more profits for their shareholders. I think we can look at people who are interested in being nonprofit are interested in being there as a service for people, not to intentionally make a bunch of dough to live a luxury life. And so, they both have their benefits, right?
And what I'm going to be speaking about, I'm not speaking about the motive for setting up a 501c3. And I hear you. I definitely understand both perspectives. And originally, mainly the 501c3 is supposed to be service oriented, program oriented, meaning there's a program that's going to benefit the public. And that is going to be what gets you the status of 501c3. It doesn't mean you're not going to make money, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to get paid. It doesn't mean that you won't abuse it. And there's plenty of people who set up 501c3s in order to abuse them. But then there's going to be the people who are like, hey, I'm providing a valuable service here. Taxes are going to eat into what I could do, and for the well-being of my my clients or my customers, versus getting into a 501c3 in order to, you know, just save money on taxes so that you can, you know, pocket it. But I don't want to say you can pocket it or anything like that. That's not the way it works. You pay taxes, don't worry about it, one way or another. But the difference between like a for-profit and a nonprofit 501c3 is that they don't pay corporate taxes. They're incorporated in the states that they're established. So in Oregon, you would be an Oregon nonprofit corporation, and you would file a form called the 990 for the IRS, and then you're tax exempt, essentially, assuming the money that you're bringing in to the organization is in support of the program that you're providing, the services that you're providing, or the community benefit. And I'm not the most articulate around nonprofit organizations. I used to do a lot of nonprofit stuff, but that was dang near 10 years ago, and I since got out of it because sometimes it's hard to make a profit as a nonprofit. So let me put it that way. So the nonprofit is probably the there's two ways of going about it. It's probably a very secure entity for people in the psilocybin industry if they can come up with a narrative in which they are providing a benefit to society by running this operation. You can disallow deductions and have a net income to the business, but you're not going to pay tax on that net profit, that net positive. And so therefore you would, you would be safe from the effects of 280E of not receiving deductions. Now, again, I'm not a professional on this topic specifically, because I have never worked with a 501c3 business operating, providing federally illegal substances. So no cannabis, no other federally illegal or Schedule I drugs. So there may be another accountant out there or tax attorney that would maybe watch this video and be like, actually they do pay taxes. But from my understanding, you wouldn't pay tax. Now, nonprofits could pay taxes, but it's usually from providing services that are outside the service, outside of the service offering they're doing. So for example, if you have vending machines, this is always one the IRS likes to use as an example. If a nonprofit goes out and has vending machines everywhere and it's making money through operating vending machines, then that income is isolated and it's then taxed. So that is when a nonprofit might pay tax. But if you're offering if you have a clinic or you're offering,
they only pay sales tax, and that's the tax they pay, and any profits they make on their vending activity goes back into the 501, and then is just used as grant money or however they have income. So the only tax savings is sales tax that they have to pay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
The reason I'm pushing on this, Justin,
okay,
is because I think a lot of people don't know squat about the taxes that are dealt with, and they like to use the word. And I'm not picking on you. I'm totally in your camp.
Sure.
I think people should be benevolent corporate citizens, and they should not be greedy and steal money and keep it. They should share it with people. But but I think it's sort of weird that people need to affix this. I'm a not-for-profit that makes me a good corporate citizen. I think you
Yeah.
can be a good corporate citizen with a mission statement to help society and
Yep.
plow profits back. Look at the soap guy, Bronner. I mean, not
Dr.
that-
Bronner's true.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yep, it's
so
a good
yeah.
example.
I like the idea that corporations are good functional businesses,
Yeah.
and you don't need to be a not-for-profit to be a good corporate citizen.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of bad not-for-profits. Believe me, I know them.
Yeah. Well, I'm just talking about kind of the nuances of the entity itself. And so, there's streamlined application processes for getting a 501c3 now. I looked it up. It's the form. Let's see if I can find the form. 1023 easy. 1023 easy is the form, and there's a whole like instructional. The IRS has set up a pretty robust informational system to provide people with information on setting those up. You would also have to incorporate with the state of Oregon. I'm not an attorney. I don't know exactly how to do that. I've definitely been involved in setting up LLCs and but Incs, corporations are a little bit more nuanced. I've even had an attorney set up a co-op here in Southern Oregon, and that's interesting. So not a bad idea to maybe spend some money on setting up a legit nonprofit corporation in Oregon if you're going to go this route. Actually applying for the 501c3 designation looks like it might be something you could do yourself potentially, as well as getting an EIN number is easy. You can apply for that online. Some attorneys will just do all of that for you because they're getting paid to do the bylaws of the corporation or the articles of incorporation for the nonprofit, and they get paid pretty good to do that, to use their standard templates to put that together. So I've got my feelers out for like good nonprofit attorneys, good also accountants that have chosen to specialize in doing nonprofit returns. I don't have a big desire to bring that back into my firm. I used to do them. I don't necessarily want to do them anymore. But I think that is a good way. If you can come up with a narrative in which you're providing a benefit to society, then you could probably pull a 501c3 off, file a 990. They're complicated and they're not complicated until you get over, I think, $50,000 in revenue. It's 990N. Hang on, I'm going to let somebody in here. It's a 990 end if it's under 50,000, maybe it's 25,000. I didn't look it up and I'm not sure, but it can be found.
It's 50,
and then it bumps
50,
up to a 990 EZ, which a 990 EZ is not easy. It's not easy. You would need a tax professional to prepare a 990 EZ, in my opinion, if you're going to do it right. And then after 250,000 gross revenue, you have to do a full 990, and that is also probably the most complex tax return you can do from my perspective. And I've done hundreds of them, so you could bank on that. So after that, is there any more comments on 501c3 designations? Like, is that a go, you think, or do you think it's like, do you think it's a valid way of going for this? Or I'm just kind of curious what other people's thoughts are on the subject. No? Okay.
No,
So
no, it's for listen, for the small operator who's generally operating in an under $200,000 kind of arena,
yeah,
a 501c3 is kind of a huge burn because
it's a pain in the butt.
yeah, it's a pain, and so the reason you would do a 501, I will give you one of the best, is because you can accept donations from rich people who are looking for tax breaks. So the character that wrote that $1 million donation to that not-for-profit, they get a tax break on that. And they can only get that if you're a designated 501. So that is the main reason you would want to be a 501c3, is you're soliciting donor money that wants the tax deduction. But frankly, the accounting work and the legal work behind it is just nettlesome. So, you know, unless you're doing $1 million a year, why would you do a 501c3?
Yeah. Yeah. And then some people are like, hey, how do I, one other thing I'd add is like, how do I get paid? And you get paid through the payroll system, just like you would if you were a corporation, a C corporation. So then, you know, we talked, Seth and I talked recently about, like, in his situation, you know, how a service center might operate in terms of like, hey, this is a therapeutic, beneficial service that I am providing in parallel, but not together necessarily, with my ketamine practice. And so, I mean, from my perspective, it's not as safe of a perspective as the nonprofit organization, where the IRS may say like, no, you don't get any deductions. And then from a nonprofit perspective, you could say, okay, because I don't pay tax, right? So, but if you're offering a service and most of your revenue is being generated on the service of providing a space and allowing facilitators to come to do their thing and to have your patient, essentially, even though we probably can't call them patients, right? Have a restorative and beneficial experience. If you can weight the income from, you know, from the actual sale of the psilocybin to more the service that the facility is providing, then you would be able to potentially allocate overhead based on your revenue streams. So if the actual sales of psilocybin are small and the margins are low, then you're not going to have as much tax as you would if all you're doing is selling psilocybin. And that's kind of where B and I landed last week, sorry, not last year. Is that the way the words have been laid out by the bill, it's almost as if the only point of a service center is to vend psilocybin. And the only point of it is to have a safe place for people to have these, not even the point of it is to provide a safe place, but it's more just to vend psilocybin. So if the narrative is,
I didn't agree to that. Just
you
to
didn't agree
hop
to that,
in there,
but
I didn't agree to that because really,
Yeah.
my belief is that it's about providing a service, and the whole point of a service center, from my understanding of reading all the rules and participating in advocating for changes, is for a supervised use, and that is just to keep people safe. And so it is a service oriented situation, and it's definitely not oriented around the sale, because people are, and that's, I think, really reflected in the rules, that people have to legally stay at the service center for different periods of time depending on how much psilocybin that they've ingested. So when you have time in there, it's really about time being at the service center, and not the sale of it is just one piece of it. So
well, that's good. And what I'm trying to do is try to keep it from both perspectives. Like, so if the IRS were to go into this service center and be like, the purpose of this place is for people to buy psilocybin and trip, okay, then the rules that they could apply, the 280 rules that they could apply would be a lot more impactful from a tax perspective than if they treated it like, oh, psilocybin is just one small part of this. The sale of psilocybin is just one small part of that. That's the illegal thing that's happening. The legal thing that's happening is that the service center is providing a safe place for people to facilitate these experiences. If we could lean on that narrative, then we've really, I think, got something there, and you can avoid the complications of like a 501c3. You could be an LLC. I would always recommend C corporation at this point, which isn't the most tax beneficial, but it's probably the safest to protect your own personal assets and not get, not get a big tax bill leaned against you personally. Edward has his hand up. Edward, why don't you introduce yourself too? Because you weren't here when everybody introduced themselves.
Yeah, I apologize. I can't be on video. I'm at work right now.
Okay.
And that's why I was a little late. So my name is Edward. I'm from Gold Beach, Oregon, and I have a company called Entheocure. My question was, a few months back, we were on Discord, and I had asked whether it would be advisable for a nonprofit, being the manufacturing cultivation, to be a nonprofit and then own the for-profit company, being the front end, like service center, hospitality type thing. Because basically, like the way that it's laid out is these people are coming there, they cannot drive away, which means that basically in most contextual basis in the beginning, it's going to be a shuttle service. And plus, I mean, like, it's pretty much going to be a wraparound package where you have to house these people too. So that's where, like, I'm kind of going with it, because it is not therapeutic, because it's not ketamine sessions. You know what I'm saying? So that's where they based it off of. But I'm trying to start more of, see, that's the other thing too, is because no chiropractor can say have their license, or massage therapists have their license in the same building. So the people that I'm trying to work with to provide this wraparound service would have to be independent contractors. However, I don't think that it would be working for the nonprofit being a cultivation. I think it would be for profit on the front end side, because my building, we're splitting it into two. So that, because I can't have any other licensure except for what's owned by the company. So that's why I'm wondering if I can have a for-profit that maybe, is owned by the nonprofit. That way it's
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing my best to avoid making things complicated, and that sounds a little complicated, and I don't think manufacturers need to be concerned about. And I'm coming from a tax perspective, not from a legal protection perspective. So somebody may argue that having more of a nuanced entity structure like that would be better for like asset protection, in terms of if you get sued by your by somebody who ran out in traffic and got hit by a car, say, they might sue you. And therefore, a more complicated, more bulletproof legal structure would be better, but that's not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is like 280E, and are you going to pay more tax as a cultivator if you don't use a nonprofit structure? And I'm saying probably not really, because you fall under a code designation 471A. Like the practice, the manufacturing aspect. And so we can actually put all of your cost of goods sold into like all your overhead and rent, or not overhead necessarily, but equipment and rent and lights and all that stuff, and not lights, less lights for you guys than the cannabis industry, but all your infrastructure gets to be deducted. And so it's for cultivators, it's not, the 280E aspect is not as impactful.
Yeah, so that's why I was wondering, like, because
yeah, let's Seth, do you have a comment related to Edward's question?
I do. I originally raised my hand because I wanted to make one other comment about the service versus products issue, but to address Edward, just for clarity, you're talking about not having you have a chiropractor license and you can't have that in the same building as a psilocybin. My interpretation of the rules is a little different. I think you can have other professional licenses and work at a service center or own a service center. You just can't use another professional license during an administrative session. So both from
Okay.
B has something to say about that too. She talked about this last week, so.
Yeah,
why don't you
so
go ahead?
Yeah,
my
that's where I
understanding
got
is
it.
that you can't, you're right, Seth, you cannot use two different licenses at the same time. So when you're providing psilocybin services as a licensed psilocybin facilitator, you cannot use your chiropractic license, you cannot use a license related to therapy or massage or anything like that. But as far as the rules go, I think that there are, you can be in the same building. You can have a psilocybin service center in the same building with lots of other kind of businesses, but you need your own entrance and area that you're operating, and only psilocybin services activities can happen in that area that you charge for. So you can do other things in your service center, like hold a community event where it doesn't have anything to do with mushrooms and there's no money changing hand, but you can't rent out your room to somebody else to use for a different purpose, if that makes
Have
sense.
its own entrance, and it can only be exclusively used for psilocybin if it's from a business perspective.
Yeah. And I think they broadened it so that you
Yeah.
can use it for other uses without the money aspect, so that, you know, people could, like I said, like hold, you know, community events and like gatherings and stuff like that. But double check me on the rules, because I haven't reread the final rules, but that's my understanding. And also back to the original comment, the people that I talked to and heard speak, including people from the Oregon Health Authority and people from the Eckhart, you know, Foundation, and were helping to write this and get it going initially, is they have intentionally left a lot of things vague so that a lot of different types of structures as far as how you run your business can happen, and also that you can keep as much of it separate as possible so that you can try and maximize your tax liabilities and all of that. So, yeah.
Went through tax deductions. So we're not exactly clear, like you can have a duplex, for example, where you've got two units, and B, from your perspective, as long as you have two doors, you go into one door, you can come in there. You go into the area, the service center, but you can have another office in the next, it can be attached to the same building, separate entrance. It could be a massage therapy practice next door. So
that's not my interpretation of it, for what it's worth. And we'll find answers to this soon. For my service center application, I demarcated within my clinic with one common front door entrance what is a licensed service center area, licensed premises and unlicensed premises. And you're allowed to demarcate what are licensed premises within your facility, what are unlicensed premises within your facility. Then there's, you know,
that'd be good to know. I look forward to getting that feedback.
yeah, so that's pending right now. I'll let you know as soon as I get the thumbs up or thumbs down on it. And I want to make just, can I make
I
one?
agree, you're right, Seth. I'm not trying to argue. You're right in that you can have like a therapy clinic in one room, could be your psilocybin service center, but included in that room, there has to be video surveillance on the entrance to your service center.
Yeah.
And you have to have a facility where you lock your product away. And then you also have to have another area for the equipment that is attached to the surveillance. So that all, it doesn't make it so you can't have a service center inside of like a therapy office or something, but you have to demarcate them very specifically, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I agree. And Justin, one more comment I was going to make just about the services products narrative. So
Yeah,
the other I think big point as part of that narrative is that as far as the this being a service rather than a products oriented industry. So part of the law for providing psilocybin services involves a whole session meeting with the facilitator, providing a preparatory session, a service that doesn't involve psilocybin at all. So
mhm,
you're legally
yeah,
mandated to provide a preparation session before a new client does a psilocybin service. You also legally have to at least offer one integration session as well. So two separate services, two separate visits that do not involve consuming or buying psilocybin. There's going to be service centers as well, as far as the nuances and what you can support with this narrative and what you can't. Like my center, we're going to have 2 preparatory sessions and 2 integration sessions as part of every package. So again, it'd be hard to fit that into a narrative of you're just coming in here to buy psilocybin. It doesn't make
yeah,
sense. In
yeah,
addition,
yeah.
the training for the facilitators
Mhm.
is a 6-month, $10,000 program designed to support people through this process. It's the safety standpoint, I guess it kind of depends on how you define safety. But it's mainly about providing psychological screening support before and after to this whole process. So again, to try to defend a narrative that these are dispensaries that are just
Yes.
there to provide a safe place for somebody to like padded walls and water fountain or something like that is not consistent with the measure and the rules and the facilitator training.
Yeah,
Uh, and so like just as far as like what you would need to be armed with to defend your narrative, like in the Psilocybin Services Act are the specific requirements for a training program. They can
mhm,
just like look through the chapters or the modules, the number of hours required by facilitators to conduct these services. Again, and see like the
yeah,
vast majority of this is a service akin to what a therapist or a doctor would be.
yeah.
Would
That's fantastic. I mean, that's good information, and it really is like the most from a legal and probably legal, and again, I'm not an attorney, but definitely from a defensible position for tax mitigation. That really is the narrative that's going to be the most beneficial, and because it really what we have to avoid is that potential approach, which is that the purpose of this establishment is to sell mushrooms. I
Yeah,
mean,
and the act was titled the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, and
yeah,
the license that you hold in order to be able to provide this is a service center license and
yeah,
a facilitator's license. I mean,
mhm.
even the language and the spirit behind this, I think all supports. This is this.
I think that's going to make all the difference. Like, what is the spirit
Yeah.
behind this? Yeah, and so that's kind of the approach that I think from a tax perspective we can take. And I still probably would organize. So there's different tax entities. There's LLCs that could be taxed as sole props, partnerships, S corps, those kinds of things. The S corp being probably the more tax favorable for small businesses in that you don't pay additional self-employment tax and payroll taxes for distributions and that. But it still will pass through. Like if there's a tax adjustment, the income passes through to the individual return, and then the individual pays the taxes on that. So if say like you had zero profit on your S corporation return, it got passed through your personal return and you paid zero tax on that. If the IRS were to come in and say like, you know what, now you're gonna, you have a taxable income of 400,000 and you now have to pay 150 to $200,000 in tax, that gets passed through to you personally, and then you end up having to pay tax. So in the cannabis world, we got, for dispensaries specifically, because the other cultivators and processors are less scrutinized than say the dispensary level. So this is a little bit more, the service center is a little bit more akin to the dispensary, right? Like if the IRS were to come in and adopt the narrative that this is for the purpose of tripping on mushrooms and nothing more, then they could come in and say, well, none of your facilitators costs, your payroll, your overhead, your rent, none of it is deductible. And therefore they could really burn you pretty hard. And so a C corporation is preferred in that way, because then the tax stays at the C corp and it can't be passed through to you personally. And then the C corporation has to deal with the tax. And after 3 years, the corporation could potentially declare bankruptcy and wipe that tax out. Not that I'm advocating for declaring bankruptcy, but it has the potential of doing that. Or you walk away from it completely and the tax doesn't follow you. You can't just jump from one C corp to the next C corp, right? You can't do that. There's ways, as long as the C corporation owes tax, it has to stay in business. But it's a lot more secure in terms of not having to go through a very as arduous process from unburying yourself at a tax debt than if it were attached to you personally.
Mhm.
So I have another, so I think I feel comfortable with that. Like I feel comfortable with that narrative, and that's kind of the approach that I want to take and I want to go forward with. I think that as far as my experience with dispensaries, it also it conforms to something that the IRS has kind of accepted as or at least it's counter to what the IRS has said about dispensaries who have attempted to try to use the same narrative. So I'm going to give an example. A dispensary will sometimes have limit its cannabis or marijuana sales space to a very small section of a store, and then it will have a very large section of where paraphernalia is sold. And then it will say, well, all of my overhead is deductible because my paraphernalia sales my whole store is almost paraphernalia sales, right? And that has been totally turned down by the IRS because when they looked at where the money was being generated, the revenue was definitely coming from marijuana, and the whole store essentially is for the purpose of smoking pot, right? So there is that risk that the IRS could come in and say something similar to that. But what if you had a store whose sales were mostly paraphernalia and whose marijuana sales were a small part of that business? What if in the same situation you had a store in which it was a high, it was a high profile glass shop where they had artists come in and they're highly sought, which I have clients that do this. And so I know that I don't know if it'll work. It never got audited, but I'm assuming it's going to work, where they have $5,000 bongs or $15,000 glass pieces. And so a large amount of their income comes from the glass sales because the glass is sought after because of the artist who created it. And most of the dispensary or the sales floor is now dedicated to these pieces. Whereas the marijuana that's being sold in the same store is much lower, like revenue, like the revenue is, well, it doesn't have to be lower, it just has to be comparable to where it doesn't look like this is just a marijuana shop.
I
And
think
so,
the profits from the, I think the revenue from the products is going to be 10% or less of the revenue from the service center.
yeah, and so I feel personally, I feel comfortable with that narrative and feel somewhat secure in that position in terms of like, if I were preparing a tax return for a business, and this is how we dealt with the ramifications of 280E, was allocating essentially the overhead and the payroll and the whole thing, and maybe like shaving off 10% of deduction. Still, that's still a lot. I probably wouldn't even go that far. And disallowing those, essentially throwing the IRS a bone and being like, hey, this is the majority of what we're doing at the service center. Selling the actual sales of psilocybin is much smaller. B, did you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so a thought process. So like Seth is saying that he's going to have a facility where he is, did you say therapy, Seth? And so you're planning on having like one room as your service center, and then the other rooms in your entity are for therapy or other things. Is that what you said, Seth?
It's, yeah, multiple rooms. There's a client administration area, storage area. So
Right.
multiple rooms within another clinic.
Okay, so Justin, in that case, so he has a clinic. So there's two different businesses, right? So he has to designate a room to be where like administration sessions will happen, and also an area that about, again, that video surveillance, and an area to store the product. And so, you know, how is Seth going to structure his business tax wise? So the waiting area, I'm assuming you have a waiting area, Seth? Yeah, so his waiting area is not for, it's for all of the businesses, and I'm not sure how that works with the rules, but so you have to designate those areas, and so you can't use it for other, again, fiscal, like, you know, situations. Like that designated room isn't going to be used for anything else. So how do you structure that kind of a situation is my question.
Well, there probably would be Seth, do you own the building or you're leasing? You're leasing.
Leasing.
So, I mean, I'm not totally clear on how it would look, but I know I can get very clear pretty easily. But you could have a company that is like the property management. There's like I'll continue with this. Like maybe property management that's subleasing to the various entities if there's two entities. And of course, you have the licensed service center that's essentially the designated areas, right? And that would be paying rent to the property management company. And then the other ketamine business in Seth's perspective would be paying rent to the property management company. I would hate to make it that complicated, but sometimes it would call for it. But then that way, the property management company would pay for all the expenses essentially of the rent and the rent and the utilities and maybe the insurances and the this and the that and the other thing. We'd have to be very careful to not look like we're trying to take deductions that would otherwise be disallowed. That's like something, that's a game that the IRS has caught on to a long time ago. So, but I think it can be done, and I think that in that specific situation, that's kind of where how I might structure that. Because I know the service center has to be its own business, right? And the service center can't say receive rent from the ketamine business. And the ketamine business cannot receive rent from the from the service center, or maybe it could, I'm not sure. But I would say, just to keep it easy, you might have to have a property management company that is subleasing the facility and receiving rent from each of the businesses, but then also paying the expenses for the businesses. Now, we would always have to like throw the IRS a bone on the psilocybin business and at least report that some deductions weren't allowed due to 280E, and this is kind of how and why we're doing this. But there will be probably like a fair amount of analysis that we're going to have to do in order to come up with a methodology. And I probably imagine, Seth, when you applied, there was a floor plan and whatnot. So we would use that same floor plan to come up with some sort of square footage allocation, or we would use like an income proration. So the income for psilocybin sales was this percentage of total service center income, and then we would apply whatever that proportion is to the other expenses in the business, and then we would disallow that portion. Actually, that's probably the way that makes the most sense. But there is another thing that we've done in order to make it even more simple, and 280E to be less impactful. Say we have to say the narrative is more of like a recreational style organization. I've heard this from other people I've talked to, that they are kind of looking into it. They're much more like less focused on the medicinal quality of it and the more of the experiential quality of it. And that would probably kind of lean us towards more of like, this is more of a dispensary versus a medically beneficial business. And we use what's called 471C, which was passed with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which essentially allow us as business owners, if we're $25 million gross revenue and below, to base our deductions based on the books and records of the organization. And therefore, that has been really beneficial for dispensaries, because the whole purpose, Congress's intent for creating 471C was to make deducting costs as cost of goods sold easier for businesses versus making things more complicated for them and having to allocate overhead to inventory and these kinds of things. And that really, that has helped dispensaries quite a bit, because with that interpretation, and essentially that's what the code says, we can take all payroll and all facility costs. It's based on books and records, essentially. What we deduct is based on the books and records. So if we say that our facility costs and our overhead, or our payroll costs, are all essentially costs of goods sold, then we can legally take those 100%, and we don't need to disallow them due to 280E. There was regulation that came about after the IRS's, sorry, it's nap time now all of a sudden. There was a governing body, there is a governing body for the IRS that saw that the cannabis industry was using this as a loophole and attempted to shut it down. And they did lay out blanket regulation that says if you were otherwise not allowed to use 471A, which is a code section for allocating cost of goods sold to inventory, then you're not allowed to use 471C. But what we have learned from our tax attorney colleagues is that the IRS really doesn't have any kind of code to base that on, meaning there's no substance there. They just said, essentially, they just said no, but they didn't make that interpretation based on the code. So if we got really nit and gritty, we could use an aggressive model or methodology like that. It's one that we use for dispensaries. And so far, there hasn't been any court cases or any conclusion on it, but it is there, especially for people with potentially higher exposure to 280E. Seth, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I've heard you use a couple different like descriptors of psilocybin services. Like we talked about medical, therapeutic. I
Yeah.
heard you say the like just tripping a couple times, and kind of like the recreational part of it.
Yeah.
And while I do think there's some differences in there, medical, therapeutic, recreational, it's fluid, and it's not going to be a legal checkbox where you're doing it for this or you're doing it for that. Even for the clinics, whether you're kind of market yourself or who you screen as patients, it's still all has to be under the same guidelines and services. And it's still all services, whether you have no diagnosis, you're exploratory, you want to do this recreationally, it's the same specific issues we're talking about with services and products and space use and percentage of revenues is all essentially going to be the same. So I just, when talking about this, especially in a public sphere and starting to create the narrative, it feels more accurate to just bundle all of this into services regardless. I think it's going to be, because it doesn't really matter about the medical, therapeutic versus recreational as far as the tax topics that we're talking about right now, right? You don't have to make a case that it's a medical intervention in order for it to be more service oriented compared to products, whether you're medical or therapeutic or not. So I think it's just going to be more consistent, more accurate. That it's all.
I think it, but there is, but from the IRS's perspective, there is. I think that there is.
No,
they will.
I'm going with Seth.
Me
I
too.
agree.
I'm going with Seth too.
Use the word healthful as
Yeah.
opposed to medical. Medical
Yeah,
is as
healthful.
polarizing as recreational. And I don't think there's ever been a time someone's taken psilocybin and not found it healthful. Mentally, spiritually, energetically, you name it, it is healthful. So I think we would be well served by defining all these expensive sessions as healthful. Even if being in the outdoors, enjoying yourself around a campfire is healthful.
Yeah.
What's
Singing
the IRS designation that you're referring to, Justin, where you say it makes a difference to the IRS?
Well, it's just the narrative that like a, you know, a cantankerous old goat might come in and say, you know, like reefer madness type people. You know, I've had them in my office, by the way, like from the
I get that. You can have stigma and judgment.
They're gonna come in and not understand what's going on and be like, what the hell's going on here? This is like demon worshiping or Satan worshiping going on here. You know what I'm saying? They're gonna be like, this is just kids tripping. You know, there's no anything happening. This is for the purpose of taking mushrooms.
But that's
it's
still
a crack house. It's a crack house.
Social stigma
Mm-hmm.
is a big topic.
Yeah.
I just don't see how it's relevant to the tax implications. You can be pro or anti cannabis, and it's the tax implications, whether you
look at it this way. Look at it from a very extreme perspective.
Yeah.
Like what if what the claims that we were making were claims for allowing people to use the space for like methamphetamine or like heroin, you know, like
that's not allowed. So why even talk about it? It's not allowed. There is zero
but that's the perspective
allowed
that
in a facilitation center. Period. That's the rule.
Again?
There are no intoxicants allowed at a service center. So I just think it's ridiculous to even talk about it or bring it up.
Well, are you talking
Like
about
you can't even have like coding. A
Oh, yeah,
facilitator can't
but
even
that's
be
what
on
I'm, no, I'm
coding,
just
you
saying
know?
like the perception of somebody who is out for the industry. Because that's the way people will look at cannabis. They look at it as a place that where you're doing, they're just doing drugs. They're buying and manufacturing drugs. And there is nothing there's nothing therapeutic about it. And therefore it might as well be like they're cooking meth at these grow farms.
But
I'm
There
not
might be a
That's the
drug
next
deal,
stigma.
yeah, that pays
I agree.
$1,000 to go get high.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
actually agree with Justin on this one but now we're talking about the law and being
Mhm.
specific. And you are right. Methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine are all federal Schedule 1 in the Controlled Substances Act. So yeah, that's a specific point, and it's right.
This is Schedule 1 that we're talking about. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. There's only one, but to B's point, the Psilocybin Services Act is passed and encoded into law. We're not talking about those other things. So you can still
No.
have your biases. You can still have the technical argument about it being a Schedule 1 substance, as is cannabis. But yeah, so that, I mean, that's a real argument, but I still don't see from a tax implication what it is, because the IRS is not the DEA.
Well, the
DEA
IRS could say, depending on, they could be saying that the purpose for all the facilities, for providing a safe space, for all the training and whatnot, is
Yeah.
for the purpose of consuming psilocybin, which you also are selling on premise. You know, it's quirky. I mean, they can take your land for growing marijuana on it. The landholder had nothing to do with the marijuana except for the fact that they rented it out to a marijuana grow. And so then the government could come and take your land from you. So who's to say that they wouldn't like interpret a session as nothing more than somebody, you know, intoxicated on mushrooms, and therefore it's but because what they're saying, this is why it matters from a tax perspective, is
Yeah.
they're saying that's what the purpose is. It's not medicinal. It's not, there's no service happening. This is an opportunity, giving people the opportunity to buy and use drugs.
Well,
And
the
so
service is
it's
the
open to
harm reduction
interpretation.
piece.
Hmm?
The service is explicit in there, and that you cannot use the substance unless you're getting the service of a licensed facilitator being there to make sure
Nice.
that you're safe.
Yeah, I think I feel good about this, you guys. Like, I feel good about the perspective. I just wanted to play devil's advocate as much as possible. And I think that there is, if this were to have to go to tax court or something like that, it would just, I think we would be in agreement. They would even be in agreement, because the auditors are one thing, the tax courts and the Court of Appeals and which not is another. And so I think personally, I feel pretty conclusive on what the narrative is and what the approach should be. And that's kind of what I've been trying to get out of this whole thing. So I really appreciate it, you guys.
Justin, I won't prolong this, but
Yeah.
did you follow the Shroom House saga?
Was that up in Portland?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where they just showed up and opened up a storefront?
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
a good case study, because it was a psilocybin dispensary.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Were no services provided. And
Yeah.
I had to.
Well,
I
that
talked
would be
to the police.
perfect. That would be a perfect contrast. You could be like, hey, look at this. Now
Yes.
this is that, and this is this. Yeah.
100%. There is,
Big time.
that saga and the specifics of what they did and how they went down is very interesting. And that's exactly what it was. It was a psilocybin dispensary without the services. Of course, it was unlicensed, but I had to have this conversation like you're having us with the police. I said, this could be Shroom House, it could be meth house, it could be heroin house, it could be anything. There's no exception to psilocybin compared to those other things on here. It had nothing to do with this measure. So yeah, that was a case use that failed. And now they're all in jail.
Yeah.
That's
No,
totally
no, I'm good. Seth, I'm gonna stay up on this one and I'll post it in the Discord. The hearing actually is today.
okay.
I have the case, I'm monitoring the case. The records are public, so I'm closely watching this. I think it was a bunch of shit, but your example about a dispensary example is really good. And not to belittle it. So stay tuned. I'm gonna watch how this one unravels, because that was some weird thing. And then Justin, you hadn't brought up churches, which I won't, not for this discussion, but under a 508, or, you know, you didn't discuss a religious organization membership.
Yeah, I just don't know enough about them.
Okay.
You know, I mean, they definitely are there. They don't file tax returns. Like,
Well,
I don't even think they
Peace
do it.
Sanctuary has a 508 papered up in Oregon already. And they're kind of functioning out of Louisville, but ironically, they've got a 508 papered up in Oregon. And so
Yeah, well,
a lot of people are gonna be
I'm all
interested to
about
see.
that stuff. I just personally am not familiar with the compliance requirements. And if we could stay like simple and for profit without getting nailed, then
Okay.
that's what I'm more for. Just because I do know about like the compliance requirements for some of those nonprofits. Now, churches are a little bit of a different story, but yeah, and it's all very interesting. But thank you, B and Seth, and tell Professor Mushroom, tell me again, what's your name?
Yeah, it's Chris.
Chris, okay, sorry.
Chris Carl with a K, so I do CK.
Okay, right on. Well, I hope to visit with you guys again sometime soon.
Thanks so much.
We'll stay on Discord. Thank you.